The long battle between a Mexican millionaire and Sempra Energy features enough intrigue and accusations for a full-length novel. San Diego police are leaving in droves. Will a deal for higher pay stem the loss of officers to other departments? And gaudy and cheesy are some of the kinder words critics have for plans to put giant amusement park rides on San Diego's waterfront. I'm Mark Sauer, and the KPBS Roundtable starts now. Welcome to our discussion of some of the week's top stories. I'm Mark Sauer. And joining me at the KPBS Roundtable today are Scott Lewis, CEO of Voice of San Diego. Hi, Scott.
Hello.
Good to have you back. KPBS Metro reporter Taryn Mento. Good to see you today, Taryn.
Hi, Mark.
And Dave Rowland, editor of San Diego City Beat. Hi, Dave. Good to see you today.
Hey, Mark.
Well, today we've got two tales filled with intrigue. The first involves Mexican businessman Jose Azano Matsura. Remember him? The feds indicted him a year ago for illegally donating to the campaigns of Bonnie Dumanis, Juan Vargas, and Bob Filner. The second tale involves San Diego-based Sempra Energy, the energy giant, and the FBI concluded the company may have broken the law to secure rights to build a billion-dollar liquefied gas plant in Baja California. It turns out that these two stories are actually one story. Scott, tell us why you folks decided to tackle this in a three-part series and look into all this intrigue.
Well, we wanted to find out why, and particularly we discovered several months ago a meeting that occurred between this guy, this wealthy Mexican named Susumo Azano, and Sheriff Bill Gore. And he also at that meeting was the district attorney, Bonnie Dumanis. And we wanted to know why. And at first our heads thinking, well, this guy is involved in the spy gear. He deals spy gear with all these multinational, agencies and
big
such.
Big contracts for spy gear sold to the Mexican government.
Yeah, and so we're thinking, well, maybe he's trying to sell, our sheriff some of this stuff or whatever. Well, so we kept looking and kept looking. It turned out that it was a much, obviously, bigger story. And when you start to pull this story back, and as have other journalists, there's you see this war that this guy had with Sempra Energy. And it goes back to their liquid natural gas plant in Ensenada. And Liam Dillon just spent a lot of time to figure out, what's at the heart of that war. How did Sempra get that liquid natural gas facility? And why did it end up manifesting itself in campaign involvement in San Diego politics? And the answer is that basically this was the last attack. His involvement in San Diego politics was kind of his last desperate attack against this company that he'd been warring with for several years.
Okay, let's talk about Azano a little bit. Where did he make his money? How wealthy are the estimates?
Well, his family, his father was an industrial facility builder for big multinational companies in Mexico, and he dabbled in building homes. We talked to some people whose homes had been built by his company in Tijuana, and they were not happy, and it was a lot of stuff like that. But then he's like, hey, I'm just going to take over spy gear, and he became basically the middleman between Israeli companies creating some really intriguing, invasive spy gear and the Mexican government, and he ended up making hundreds of millions of dollars on some of these deals with the Mexican government that were, maybe one step below some of the biggest stuff that we've seen at the National Security Agency. And so that's how he made his money, and he decided to invest in a claim that a rancher was making against Sempra Energy as they were trying to build their liquid natural gas plant. This rancher claimed they stole his land, and so this guy decided to invest in that lawsuit. It said, if you win this lawsuit, I'm going to get a portion of what you win. And that's at the heart of this dispute. All
right, we're going to get more into that. Let's go to the other side of this, though, and Sempra, of course, they're headquartered in San Diego. Yeah. And they do have, as you're alluding to, big ambitions in Mexico. What is this LNG plant? Why is it so important to them to build this down there on the coast?
Well, for a long time, there was a big race to get an LNG plant on the west coast of the United States so that you could get liquid natural gas from places like Asia, you could bring it in, and then you could pipe it all through the United States. This race was going on, and Sempra in particular was racing against another company called Marathon. And it was a big story several years ago when the governor of Baja California condemned the land that Marathon had gotten permitted for their plant, which basically meant that Sempra won that race. Sempra built its facility, and then it dealt with a lot of problems. One of the things it had to do is get Ensenada to go along with it, and it ended up creating a $7 million, what you might call mitigation fund for Ensenada. And this mitigation fund was used by Ensenada officials to buy things that they needed for the city or that they wanted.
No, mitigation fund's kind of a euphemism here to some people, right? Other people, it's a slush fund or a bribe, right?
It raised the concerns of the FBI, and the FBI ended up interviewing Sempra about it a lot. Now, they never found that anything was wrong with that because they ended up deciding that Sempra could investigate this themselves, and when Sempra investigated it themselves, wouldn't you know it, they came back and found that they hadn't
done anything wrong.
Right.
Well, I mean, that was such an intriguing part of this whole series. How in the world does the FBI step back and say, yeah, you guys go on ahead and investigate yourselves, tell us what you find? I mean, doesn't that smell a little bit?
Yeah, I mean, first of all, it's amazing reporting. I mean, this is a classic case of you pull on a little string and you have no idea what's on the other end that you're gonna come across. So you guys should be very proud. It's really good stuff. Like you, I'm super intrigued by the fact that the feds basically just said, it sounds pretty. It sounds pretty on the up and up for Sempra.
But first, Scott's saying they're confronting them. They're saying over the SEC officials, the FBI, and all of a sudden we've been targeting you. And then
it's not unprecedented. Actually, if you'll remember, the city of San Diego had something similar. They were accused. The city of San Diego was accused of securities fraud. They were forced by the SEC to investigate themselves. They hired a company that we used to talk about around this roundtable a lot, Kroll Incorporated.
The big Kroll report.
We spent $20 million as a city, and that report was supposed to be the SEC's investigation. So it's not unprecedented for this sort of thing. They say, we're stretched thin, so prove to us you didn't do it. And I think that was interesting.
Tara?
I was just going to ask, how did they go about investigating themselves? What was the process that they followed?
And how transparent was that process? Do we really know what they did?
I'm not really qualified to answer that question. I'm not sure. It sounds like they did enough to prove to the FBI that they got us a letter that said, okay, you're cool. So it would be actually...
and you mentioned earlier their competitor, Marathon. That's the big, I think, French-based energy giant, and they were competing head-to-head with this Sempra over the rights to get this coastal plant built.
They were obviously upset.
So they got their own investigation going, according to the report.
They were upset, so they hired their own company called Interfor that came out with its own very damning conclusions about why Sempra won that race. Obviously, they relied on anonymous sources that we never even found. So we just did our best to try to unravel this story, and we ended up as far as we thought we could go. What basically happened is not only did Sempra convince the FBI to stop looking at it and let them do that, but then they also convinced the FBI and DOJ to investigate this other guy and say, he's your real problem.
Turn around, go after Azano.
And one of the things that really caught our eye through this investigation is when you start to pull that up, you start to see that in the Mexican press and in Mexico City, there was a lot of talk about one thing in particular, that this guy, above all other threats to the U.S.-Mexican relations, that this guy was being held up in D.C. and in Mexico City as the single biggest threat to the two countries' relationship.
Right.
And so we see that, we're like, what is going on? What is the deal? And so, we talked to some former ambassadors and such, and the Sempra was so worried and so upset about this guy, they were able to direct a lot of attention to it. And then he just made a mistake, or he was stupid.
And he was desperate at that point because he's looking for some allies, somebody to line up, right?
And
because he's got this big giant. The FBI has switched around from their investigation of Sempra.
And so now
it
all falls into place. Why he was trying to meet with FBI or with Bill Gore? It wasn't because he was trying to sell him spy gear. It was because Bill Gore used to be the head of the FBI in San Diego, and maybe he could try to help swing things the other way. Bonnie DeMantis, and then he met with Juan Vargas, and he helped fund Juan Vargas's campaign. And then when you talk to Juan Vargas and you ask him what they talked about, it was Sempra.
So, Dave, go ahead.
Yeah, I was just going to ask. I'm not ready to let the feds. Getting back to the feds. It's not just the FBI. It's the U.S. Attorney's Office, the Department of Justice. I mean, have you looked into relationships between Sempra officials and high-level DOJ officials, or even local U.S. Attorney's Office officials?
We didn't find anything, but we continue to ask questions. There is another intriguing aspect to this, which is Laura Duffy, the U.S. Attorney for
San Diego.
She recused herself from this case, and nobody has found out why yet. And so,
but she was a public supporter of Bonnie DeMantis, so she has that entanglement here.
Yeah, and so until we can find that out, I think we'll keep asking some questions. And I think but again, at the heart of this was this war between this company and this very wealthy Mexican, and it ended up playing out in our own politics.
Yeah, it's funny. We were talking before we went on the air. You come away from this and you kind of holding your nose. It's the old clothespin story because who kind of looks worse in this?
Well, there's even so much
Sempra, Azano, the FBI.
Yeah, there's so much side intrigue that there's evidence that this guy Susumu Azano got money to the mayor of Ensenada, which got the mayor of Ensenada to send the police to invade this liquid natural gas facility, where they're freaking out because if guns go off and there's liquid natural gas, that's bad. Yeah. And so then the army goes in and kicks the police out. Now, this is stuff we'd all heard about, but to see it all in one narrative as these two clashes, I mean, it was fascinating.
Well, you also have Sempra paying off Ensenada, right? I mean, for a bunch of good.
Well, this mitigation fund. Right, so it's not unprecedented to build a power plant and set aside some money for mitigation, but that raised the concern.
And Ensenada went to them first and said, you should kick down some.
And there was some evidence that they said, well, we'll make this go faster. But then what Sempra was able to prove, at least to the standards of the FBI, was that they didn't get any benefit out of it.
All right. Well, reporter Liam Dillon did a great job on that, and I'm sure we'll be seeing follow-up stories as we go along. We're going to move on now. An independent survey last year confirmed what the San Diego Police Officers Association has long been saying. The cops here are among the lowest paid in California. A new deal announced by Mayor Kevin Faulconer and union leaders is designed to help rectify that. Taryn, start with the high points of this kind of creative deal, and we'll get to what they had to work around to get there.
Right. So it's a new 5-year contract. And the first 3 years officers have to pay out of pocket for things like equipment, uniforms, health benefits, and they do get some sort of allowance for that, but they still have to kind of pay a little bit out of their own pocket.
So that hits their take-home pay.
Right. So this increases their allowance, so they're still bringing a little bit more money home.
Okay. And let's talk about, we're going to get into Proposition B, which was kind of the hurdle they had to work around here. But before we do, we have Brian Marvel. He's the head of the Police Officers Union. Let's hear what he has to say about Proposition B in this.
The last 2 fiscal years is when the salary increases, and that's trying to keep it within the confines of what Proposition B, the citizens of San Diego, said no pensionable pay raise until after that. So that's when those will kick in. So within those 3 years, we found other ways and methods to actually increase take-home pay for the officers.
All right, so let's explain what he's talking about there. We've got a freeze in effect here for a couple of more years yet, right?
Right, so Proposition B basically froze any pensionable pay increases, I think, till the end of fiscal 2018. And so basically they want to increase their take-home pay, so you can't do that by raising their pay because of Proposition B. So they come up with this creative way to just increase their allowance so they're actually spending less out of pocket, bringing more home. But then once that freeze lifts, they can actually increase up to 3.3% each year for 2019 and 2020.
And that would add to their base of pensionable pay as you work through a long career.
With the additional of the allowances that they already are able to have in the 3 years.
And as I understand it, the deal is also weighted to officers with 8+ years experience. What was the thinking there?
Well, they were noticing the whole problem, kind of where this negotiation started coming up, was that they were noticing more officers were leaving for better pay elsewhere. That's kind of what kicked this all off. And Brian Marvel said that they noticed it was right around this 8 years is when they started seeing officers leaving, going elsewhere. Some were even retiring and then also getting jobs elsewhere. So he said the 8 years is they wanted to create an incentive to keep them here, and so it would make less other opportunities less attractive to them, like going to the sheriff's office or something that has maybe allowed them to have more take-home pay.
All right, and Scott, give us a little bit of background how we got here, why we had such a thing as a Proposition B and freezing the union members' pay like this.
Well, obviously we had this pension scandal, and at the heart of the pension scandal was this giant payment we have to make every year to just keep the pension system up to speed with what it owes people who retire. And so to try to control that, they did 2 things. They cut off pensions for future employees, which I know Dave was a huge fan of. But then they also tried to cap pensionable pay, which, because you decide how much the city has to pay based on salaries, if you keep salaries steady, then the debt doesn't grow. And so they tried to cap pensionable pay. But the thing is, you can't cap pensionable pay as a directive. You have to actually negotiate each year with employees. But what Bob Filner, as mayor, was able to do, along with Kevin Faulconer, was get 5-year agreements from each employee group, and so that kind of kept everything steady. What they've done, though, is now create a new contract for the police to allow them to still conform to that, so that that pension bill doesn't get bigger. But like she said, it helps them
sweeten
make more
that take-home pay and figure out a way around that, Dave.
What I wonder is where does this put San Diego in the grand scheme of things with other agencies, with other locations, other cities? In terms of compensation,
right.
I mean, are we? It sounds like we're just a little bit
are we significantly more competitive?
I mean, it's not really exactly clear what Brian Marvel was just elaborating on. Is that what really is it eliminates that incentive? So there's not really that gap as much between the take-home pay of officers here and the deputies that they're seeing at the sheriff's office. So it kind of eliminates that incentive that they were saying was pushing them out the door a little bit.
In the sheriff's office, we should note that most of the good, experienced cops that get to 8 years or whatever level were going over to the sheriff's office.
Well, that was right where the discrepancy was, too, right? At the beginning pays were pretty close, but it was at that point where our salaries turned out, or the city's salaries turned out to be lower so much.
Well, we're going to get into the numbers here and how many folks had gone, but here's what Police Chief Shelley Zimmerman had told KPBS about how many officers have left here in the past year.
If you take this fiscal year right now, and which started on July 1, we've had 16, a minimum, because you're not required to say why you've left our police department, but a minimum of 16 have said that they've left for other law enforcement agencies. 14 of the 16 have been local, and the majority going to the sheriff's department.
Okay, so they are, that is a magnet then, the sheriff's department, as we noted. So how many officers do we have now? Have you got those numbers there? And how many are called for in the budget?
I mean, when they announced this deal at the press conference on last Friday, they said it was 1,834 that they had on staff, but they were budgeted for 2013, I believe.
So almost another couple hundred officers we don't have right now.
Right, but actually even on Monday when they came on midday, Chief Zimmerman and Brian Marvel, actually they had calculated the numbers again, they lost 3 more. So it's actually, I mean, so it's still like, you notice if you keep following, like every couple of weeks they get month or weekly updates, and it's a couple every now and then.
Okay. Now we noted how they've worked around Prop B and all. Is this going to be a problem down the road for city budgets or for this whole pension system? Are we kicking the can here by sweetening the compensation package now, or does that remain to be seen? There were some projections here I think the mayor's office had worked out.
You know, the city is collecting more money, and so its annual budget is a lot easier to balance. But yeah, sure, it costs more money to pay people more, but they have protected it, and it seems pretty clear that they have protected it from increasing that pension bill, which I guess is nice.
You know, Dave, you were about to say something?
No, I wasn't, but I'll add that, like Scott says, more money's coming in. You know, we just came out of a huge recession, and so you know that you could say that was an anomaly. You could maybe predict it's going to happen again.
But maybe we're back to more normal times, is what you're saying?
Yeah, that's what I'm saying.
And a lot of the city officials at the press conference were saying, like, this will not increase our pension liabilities. This is not going to increase it. And I think the way that they were, I mean, even though there is going to be a pensionable pay increase later on, there's some, in the calculation, it is assumed that it will go up once the freeze lifts, that pay will go up 3.3%. So they got the full increase of that. So that's kind of what they mean, that it won't affect it. But we will be hearing, City Council will be hearing a report on how this deal would affect the pension system.
All right, a couple seconds left here. What's the last step now? The deal isn't quite finalized, right?
No, and we're supposed to find out midday today if the police officers union does ratify it. So they're, I think, close to 1,800, as we mentioned, members are supposed to be voting today. The next step from that will be hearing that report to council, and then city council also has to approve it.
They got to
as well.
throw the holy water in the deal too. Okay, we'll be obviously following up with those stories. Well, Seattle has its Space Needle and St. Louis has the Gateway Arch. How about a huge landmark for San Diego's waterfront? A giant Ferris wheel, say, or a sky tower. Several unsolicited proposals for some very tall toys have landed with the San Diego Port Commission. And Dave, your editorial in City Beat called them goofy on a massive scale. Which is, you know, maybe some of the kinder words that we've seen from other folks here. You're not crazy about a giant Ferris wheel right down on the water.
No, and it comes down to personal taste. You know, just speaking as myself, well, I wrote the editorial as the head of City Beat editorial department, so I guess I'm speaking for them too. But it just seems like lately we're just trying to turn San Diego into a big amusement park.
Well, tell us specifically what's being proposed right now. What's the one I'm alluding to, this Ferris wheel? How big is it?
Well, and it's important to note that nobody's going to break ground on a Ferris wheel tomorrow.
Okay.
You know, these are 5 different proposals that have come into the port, and the port makes very clear that they were unsolicited. They just came in. People want to do this on the waterfront. They see an opportunity. They come to the port and they propose these projects, 4 of which are big observation wheels, they call them, Ferris wheels to you and me. And one of them is a big sort of needle-like thing, a sky spire, I think they're calling it, with gondolas that kind of snake up and down the middle of it.
I think somebody in UT referred to it as a giant coffee press.
A giant coffee press, right?
Yeah,
yes, I think that might have been Roger Sholey might have done that. But
that one was my favorite.
So there's a lot that has to happen, you know, and one commissioner one port commissioner in particular, Bob Nelson, has been very outspoken that, you know, these things are fine, and maybe, you know, once we all decide what we want to do on the waterfront, maybe we all decide that we want a big Ferris wheel.
Maybe this fits in the grand plan.
But he says in the middle, right now what we have going on is a big update of the master plan, the port master plan. They're trying to decide a lot of different really important issues that are going on the waterfront right now, such as the Midway Museum. They're required by their coastal permit to create a park. And that's right next door to where some of these, you know, projects would be.
Of course, that's a giant old aircraft carrier.
Yeah, right next to that Navy Pier, it's supposed to be a park, and so they're going to have parking for that park somewhere, and so maybe that parking should go where these projects are being proposed. There's the convention center project that is still being debated. There's all kinds of things that are important decisions that haven't been made yet, and Nelson says, hold on. These are unsolicited proposals. Let's just put these on the back burner. Let's get to them later. But Dan Malcolm, the chair of the Port Commission, seems to be really kind of hot and bothered about vetting these things right now.
Now let's tell for our audience specifically, how big is this thing? I mean, it's hundreds of feet in this proposal, right?
There are 5 different projects being proposed by local groups and outside groups.
But the Ferris wheel, I think, your editorial said it was 400 plus feet by the time you get.
Well, there's 4 different Ferris wheels being proposed. So the tallest one, I believe you're right, is 450 feet. One of them is maybe 150 feet. So they range in size and scope depending on the project. Right. They're being proposed by, like I said, either local groups or groups like the outfit that built the Orlando project, I think, and one that's backed by the people that did the Seattle Ferris wheel, I think. You know, so I don't know. It just seems like everybody wants to put a big icon somewhere. We got to do this massive thing, when a lot of people just feel like you need to open up the waterfront to more passive uses like parks, and just make it inviting for residents to go down there rather than just a huge amusement park. So now, is the Port Commission the right place for this? Their Committee on Public Art, or would there be another entity or entities?
Well, the port manages all of the tidelands all around the port of St. all around the bay. Those are public, actually state lands that the port gets to be the landlord of. And so all the hotels you see, all of the car importers, all of them, they're all tenants of the port. And so this is a proposal from people to become another little tenant right there to do that sort of thing. And so, this is their job to come up. But they have a mandate. The port has a mandate to do maritime operations, to bring cargo and stuff like that in, and to make sure that the environment is protected. Mandate doesn't include giant wheels, but maybe they can figure it out.
And go ahead, Dave.
And I was going to say, the Coastal Commission also State Coastal Commission has a lot to do with this too. Everything that's proposed for port tidelands has to pass the muster of the Coastal Commission, which is all about public access to the coast.
Right. Now, this isn't the Ferris wheels and these projects immediately. These aren't the only big wacky things that have been kind of put forth. We had the Wings of Freedom here. A couple people said that looked like giant bunny ears in the drawings, and then the Neptune's Revenge, the Clash of the Titans. It was the mythical figure and the giant dolphins riding them down.
That was my favorite, by the way.
Yeah, and then we had all the boats, the giant boats that were going to be there along the convention center, which a version of that did wind up in La Jolla, out at the museum. Out there now, you can see all these boats, and people talked about a great pile up there. I don't know. It's public art here, though we haven't had a great deal of it over the years. Look at back in Midwestern cities, Detroit, Philadelphia, certainly Washington, New York. They got all sorts of public art dating back centuries.
The big difference is, so what Dave's talking about is that they're trying to create an attraction, an amusement. Public art is more of like a symbol or a sign, and so I think like that we have switched now, and I think they've identified that well, is from that sort of let's make something look good to something that like actually might bring families and stuff down there, which
bring people,
and money. And sorry to interrupt, but they, they're also talking about, I think they want the revenue.
The Ferris wheel's like $30 a ride, right?
All right. Well, we're going to have to see how that goes, and we'll see some follow-up reporting on whatever we get down there. That does wrap up another week of stories at the KPBS Roundtable. I'd like to thank my guests, Scott Lewis, a voice of San Diego, Taryn Mento of KPBS News, and Dave Rowland of San Diego City Beat. A reminder, all the stories we discussed today are available on our website, kpbs.org. I'm Mark Sauer. Thanks for joining us today on the Roundtable.